Have you wondered why certain people are able to practice and develop in Tantra more than other? If you want to develop, come to your full fruition of your potential, learn Tantra and practice Tantra, then one should learn about these obstacles in the path of Tantra that stops one from developing fully. These obstacles are known as Pash. One can think of them as shackles or even bondages. And when you know about these bondages and when you can make a conscious choice in awareness in your life, then one can overcome these bondages and develop fully in Tantra. So, what are these Pash? One bondage is the bondage of Shastra Pash. When one blindly end up following some text, a religious text, scientific text, without any direct experience, then that can lead to a trap of words over experience. Some people believe every written rule and never test them in their own practice. For those people, spirituality remains a second hand thing, relying on belief rather than true realization. And it is important to question oneself if one is acting out of belief or on direct realization. Debating over scriptural truth, debating about what is written and understanding the nuance of the writer is important, but what is even more important is experiencing those texts in your own life. When one gets stuck too much into intellectualism and never actually testing transformation, then that leads to Shastrapas. Anything not found in traditional text can also be true. Insights and mystical experiences, if they are not written in a book, can also be true. So one has to go beyond the rigidity of mind for spiritual growth. Many times people believe in only one book, and that also is the Shastra Pass. Refusing to explore beyond results in sort of sectarianism and blocks one from getting true wisdom. Even when one is following a tradition and when just does some ritual mindlessly without understanding the deeper insight and internalizing the teaching through direct experience, then those practices end up becoming empty and over a time lose spiritual power if one is not attuned to it. So, a balance is needed between the scriptural knowledge and direct experience. And in the end, the direct experience is the real authority. And a true seeker should question fearlessly. And that is the whole basis of ancient Upanishad as well, where truth is revealed through dialogues and not through commandments. Even when you chant mantra, do not just chant mantra in the mind, but feel it in your body as well. Let the spiritual vibration flow through your body and transform you. Then, after this Shastra Pass, there is no sequence. However, the other Pass after this Shastra Pass is the Jati Pass. Thinking where one has taken birth is very significant. When one ends up giving one's caste, race, or even gender a very great significance than it should have, then what happens is that our spiritual and even our worldly ability gets defined by this limited identity of our gender, of our race, or our caste. and it can lead to superiority or it can lead to inferiority depending on the mental understanding of that caste or religion or sect or gender. It definitely ends up affecting the ego in a negative way and fuels a division in the mind and creates all sorts of illusion. One ends up refusing to be open to ideas beyond these gender norms and caste norms and race norms. And when one starts to understands or reflects one identity based on these norms, then one ignores the larger truth. Soul is beyond gender, soul is beyond race, and soul is definitely beyond caste. And it fixed idea about identity of one's birth, of the body's gender or race or caste, stops one from aligning with the higher dharma of eternal truth and is an obstacle in the path. One should know that caste is a social construct and not a universal truth. Real liberation comes from going beyond these rigid rules, stepping beyond these imposed identities. Then another obstacle in path of Tantra is the Deshapash or identification with the place or the cultural or regional identity that shapes one mind. It can be nationalistic superiority, that my land is the greatest, believing your country or your culture as superior. And when one does that, that creates a separateness and fuels arrogance, and that hinders progress in spiritual and tantra practices. One ends up rejecting other traditions or culture without understanding, refusing some spiritual teachings or philosophy that is not part of one's culture can stop one getting that broader truth beyond one's cultural conditioning. One should not limit spirituality to one culture, believing that only your birth region's approach or the country's approach to spirituality is valid or philosophy is valid. Universal knowledge transcends border, and too much attachment to one's homeland stops one from realizing the higher dharma. Many people end up having some sort of hesitation to even go beyond their culture or region of birth, and that stops one from realizing the broader wisdom that is present in the nature. Universe really has no borders. All borders are man-made lines, and in Tantra, one should identify oneself as a cosmic being. All places are sacred and all people are divine. The other pash or obstacle in path of Tantra is the Deha pash, when one identifies too much with the physical identity. It could be your physical appearance. Now, appearance doesn't last forever. One ages, beauty changes as one ages. The identity, when it is tied too much to the physical appearance, then when one ages, the self worth also can decrease, and that can breed suffering. Fear of aging, fear of death, all this comes from this deh pash or the bondage of the physical body and identity. It can result in anxiety and even denial of life cycles. Too much identification with fitness and strength can stop physical strength, can stop one from seeing beyond the physical body and the spiritual strength which lies beyond the physical body. When one endlessly chases highs of sensory experiences, then that also dulls the senses. And that is why sometimes one needs to abstain from sensory experiences, so that when you get the sensory experience, then you can enjoy it as well. Senses, sensory experiences and pleasures are part of life. However, one should recognize the body as a temporary vessel for consciousness. And when one is abiding in this realization, then even aging is not a loss but a transformation. Pain, pleasures, and decays of the body are waves that comes and goes, and one learns to float with that rather than attaching too much importance to them and end up suffering in the path of Tantra or in a life as well. The next Pash is the Manopash, the bondage of the mind. And it is this illusion of the mental control, overthinking, endless mental chatter that results in the mind just looping in either past experiences, regrets, or future worries, and never resting in the now, which is important, which is at the crux of all Tantra practices as well. Indecision results from too much mental hang ups, and that destroys the inner peace. These mental loops of worry often results in emotional turmoil and stress and anxiety. And when one lacks a clarity, then one becomes a prisoner of one's own emotions. And it need not just be anxiety of worry, it can even be digital distraction and an overstimulation of the mind as well. Always looking at the phone for constant notification or entertainment keeps the mind restless, and the mind becomes fragmented. Uncontrolled desires and impulses also results from this manopash, from one pleasure to the other, from one idea of seeking validation from the society or people to the other, never fully satisfied or content. Emotional attachment to thought becomes a bondage. Believing every thought that arises in one's mind as a real also results in suffering. So, it is important to realize that one is not one's thought. I know that there is a very famous European medieval Renaissance philosopher who said, I think, therefore I am. But that is not complete true. One's identity is not one's thought. One's identity is not limited to one's thoughts. Thoughts are waves on the ocean, and one can watch these thoughts without identifying with them. And there is a deep stillness that is always present beneath these waves of mind. And that is where one should abide when one is free from this manopash. Then the next bondage is the bondage of morality, rigid morality, and even duties. That is dharmapash. When the duty that one has to fulfill becomes a cage, a prison, following some sort of outdated moral code without questioning why we are following it. Strictly adhering to tradition simply because it has been passed down is dharmapash, a bondage. And in path of Tantra, one has to become free from this pash or bondage. It results in stagnation when one is rigidly adhering to the past. When one ends up prioritizing social obligation over inner truth, when one ends up living by societal expectation and not by one's deeper calling. In dharma pash results in conflicts of mind and life expression where personal truth is sacrificed for seeking approval. Fear of breaking these rigid norms ends up restricting the mind and creating maladies in the mind, and it limits one's transformation. It can even result in guilt for not meeting the traditional expectation or even shame for not fulfilling family duty that no longer serves higher awareness. So, if one is too much into this rigid idea of dharma pash, then one ends up suffering emotionally, ends up having self blame. So, one should not confuse blind obedience to rigid rule following as a virtue or a higher virtue without questioning it does not lead to liberation or moksha or sublime tantra practices. One should not mistake external compliance for some sort of spiritual depth. When dharma is aligned with higher awareness, then it is not a static rule. Dharma even evolves with time, that is the Kala Chakra. Rules may serve some purpose based on time, place, and circumstances. However, authentic dharma arises from direct experience, and that is what Tantra, Siddha Tantra path is about. Then the next pash or bondage is the Nyaya pash, or the bondage of justice or judgment, the illusion of fairness in this rigged world, sort of, where one relies on justice of the society, then one may end up feeling helpless in face of injustice. Corruption is there, and if one faces corruption of some power, maybe even the government, one may result in feeling of helplessness or sense of defeat. So, true justice is beyond this limited social justice. One social justice, what we call, can also be a blind justice or andha kanun, and it may not be true justice. Most of the justice in the world today is about compensation, and compensation is never true justice. And one should realize that, and one should shape one's life to a greater aspect of a universal justice of of a rhythm or the rhythm, the cosmic order of karma as well. So one should try to keep one's faith in laws beyond these human laws that may end up benefiting the corrupt and even punishing the innocent. Apart from this social justice, we also have our individual justice, idea of justice. And when one ends up having this obsession about our personal idea of justice, it can even be revenge. Then that also leads to an obstacle in the path of Tantra. Too much obsession with revenge can lead to obstacle in Tantra. Yes, anger is natural, but attachment to anger is bondage. Then the next pash or bondage is the manogranthi pash, or the bondage of the mental affliction. One can think of them as guilt or even emotional hang-ups. The weight of unreleased karma, where one holds on to past mistakes as permanent stains. When one ends up thinking about past wrongs or past wrongdoings too much, then that can result in feeling of unworthiness, or thinking that one is not worthy of tantra practices, one is not eligible to do tantra practice, or even unworthy of happiness. And true awakening in the path of tantra happens when one is free from these guilt aspect of the mind. One should free oneself from this outdated image, self-image also, that is based on this past regrets and guilts. Instead of punishing oneself, one should think about changing this past mistakes into learning, and atoning for the mistakes by learning the lesson and transforming one's life from here and now onwards. Too much self-hate, too much regret stops one from accepting genuine change. And it can be anything. It can even be about shame about breaking certain social norm, or feeling shameful for dishonoring one's family or tradition. And it is this shame that blocks one from learning and growth. Fear from one's past action, thinking that okay, because of one's mistake one is not pure enough for divine experiences, believing one's self as unworthy of spiritual grace, thinking that one is not eligible for receiving love and healing, because one is always in this self-condemnation mode and beating oneself down. Tantra says that guilt is an energetic knot, and it is not an absolute morality, but it is this knot in the spiritual energetic body that stops one from progressing in the path of Tantra. And this energetic knot has to be cut through by Tantra practices. And when one does that, then one's energy becomes open and unrestrained, and that leads to development in the path of Tantra. The path of Tantra is always there for you. It's always inviting you to higher awareness and spiritual divine experiences. So when one cuts this manogranthi pass of energetic blockages, then one becomes open to receive this spiritual bliss. Then another pass in Siddha Tantra we know as Andhakoop Pash, or the frog in a well. When one ends up thinking one's own immediate reality as the ultimate truth and stops from exploring the truth beyond one's immediate reality. It can be cultural or religious upbringing, believing that your way is the only valid path. And when one is stuck in this small framework, then one becomes blind to universal wisdom. Accepting only what is measurable in scientific way, scientific materialism way, that also blinds one or makes one not see the insights of the spiritual dimension. When one is trapped in one's limited idea of intellectual mind, it can lead to even intellectual arrogance or even a rigid belief system. So one should not have fear of exploring the unknown or hesitation to try new practice, which can lead to a broadening of awareness to a higher truth. So instead of staying in a limited area, one should explore more. Beyond the shallow water, there is an infinite depth of ocean And wisdom is that infinite depth of ocean, and one should explore that. And when one is stuck in a limited idea of frog in a well syndrome, then that is a bondage or an obstacle in the path of Tantra. So one should not be very quick at dismissing what one has not understood or seen, and often when one doesn't understand something, a limited mind can end up mocking also, and one should not mock sublime spiritual truth just because one has not experienced them or realized them, because if one does that, one shuts the door to deeper insights, and unconsciously one is choosing ignorance. What one knows is merely just a drop in the infinite ocean of wisdom of the whole cosmos, and one should dissolve this limited well, and the frog must jump out of the well to a greater cosmic water of wisdom. Another Pash in Siddha Tantra is the Ananda Pash. Now, when one chases limited temporary pleasures, pleasures that fades away, then such temporary pleasures can leave one restless, because these momentary pleasures, if one is attached to them, can lead to obstacle in the path of Tantra. Now it can be any kind of momentary joy, food, relationship, entertainment, things that don't last. We keep seeking new highs, and one is never satisfied by that. Enjoying pleasure mindlessly, seeking comfort without awareness, results in this Ananda Pash, and one is bound to that cycle of craving and indulgences, then one stops oneself from progressing in the path of Tantra, and such a person might get lost in these temporary pleasures instead of deriving sublime truth. Ananda Pash is like that itch that one feels on the back, and when one scratches it, it feels so nice. But everybody knows that too much scratching the itch can result in pain, and it is this balance of pain and pleasure that one has to realize, where one should indulge in pleasures with awareness, so that one is not trapped in this cycle of pain and pleasure, where one ends up seeking always the next high, but realizes that all of it, pleasure and pain, is a wave that rises and falls, and one should use such moments of pleasures and pains to channel it for higher awareness instead of scattering it. Then, of course, apart from these pash or bondages or obstacles in the path of Tantra, there are other pash also. They are often called as Ashta pash, or the eight obstacles: hatred, feeling of disgust. People may feel some sort of aversion or disgust towards people, certain people or objects or situation, and may refuse to even engage with certain people who hold different political, religious, or even lifestyle beliefs. And that may result in division in mind and even hostility. Such creation of us versus them mindset makes one blind, and one is blind with us versus them, then one stops to see divinity in all, and that is an obstacle in path of Tantra. Having aversion or hatred, ghrina towards people or objects or situation that one doesn't resonate with, is also an obstacle in path of Tantra. Cancel culture, sort of extreme intolerance towards differing opinion is an obstacle path of Tantra. Having lajja or shyness, sort of an excessive self-consciousness or inhibition becomes becomes an obstacle in the path of Tantra. Fear of death, fear of suffering, fear of losing social status, bhai is another pash. Doubt or shanka is another pash. Constant skepticism about one's own spiritual capability or worthiness, over reliance on some external idea about something, and dismissing one's own intuitive understanding becomes an obstacle in path of Tantra, where one ends up not trusting one's direct experience and relies too much on doubt, which leads to intellectual speculation. Another obstacle in the path of Tantra is the jugupsa or disgust towards body, disgust or aversion towards sexuality or material world, feeling impure, feeling sinful for one's own natural desires. Such act of feeling aversion is a obstacle in the path of Tantra. Man or pride is also another obstacle in path of Tantra. Feeling superior because one has wealth or knowledge or spiritual practice also becomes an obstacle in path of Tantra. So these are various paths or obstacles in the path of Tantra, and by hearing what we shared today, some may gain insight into these individual paths and may even have some intuitive understanding after hearing how to overcome them. However, each path in Siddha Tantra arts is treated one by one individually and has its own set of practices and understanding so that one can overcome and transform that path and progress in the path of Tantra, which is very important to do if one wants to practice and refine in the path of Tantra.